Excellent. Thank you, Phil, and I'm very happy to be here. And so, yeah, so the slides are up. I'm going to jump right in. And I just, what I really want to do is some big picture thinking and hopefully share some insights and some exciting information about urban wood utilization and some of the background and history. And, I think it's always important to look back and really see how far this movement has come as part of understanding where it might go next. And definitely addressing that idea of how there is a role in this movement for everybody. It's really dynamic. So here's the ground I'm going to cover, a little bit of background, some of the drivers, why are these things happening, some of the milestones and metrics, and then, of course, end up looking a bit to the future. One of the things I think is important to recognize with urban wood opportunities is this isn't new. It's amazing to me how well-established urban wood utilization is in terms of when we look back in time. I mean, this idea of utilizing urban trees is well established. Urban forestry as a practice in the U.S. is well over 100 years old, certainly has its roots within landscape architecture and urban planning and some of those partner professions, but there is well-documented information going back over 100 years of urban forest management within major U.S. cities, and so this is a well-established practice, always evolving like many professions, but well-established practice. Similarly with urban wood utilization, there's also well-documented information going back to the 20s of urban wood utilization within the United States, including this very entertaining YouTube video showing trees in Detroit being cut and made into lumber in about 1928. So I think, sometimes just recognizing urban wood utilization might be new to some people, but it certainly has a rich history in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. So why is urban wood utilization something we're talking about now? Why is it something that has been growing and evolving over recent decades? What are those needs and drivers that have pushed communities and other partners to look at urban wood utilization as an opportunity? And one of the things to understand, I've worked with urban wood utilization throughout the U.S., some work looking at recycling in Canada as well, and a little bit of partnership globally as we've looked at the opportunities to move beyond rural forests and look at the landscape. But what I see when I work in these different areas is in many ways it's always unique about what the local needs are and the local drivers that kind of push communities or push partners past that tipping point to embrace urban wood utilization. But within those needs and drivers, there's some common themes. Certainly in the U.S., much of the urban wood utilization that many of us are familiar with was driven by the disease outbreaks associated with Dutch elm disease and massive death of urban trees, of elm trees. And that drove some cities to say, okay, how can we manage this as a waste problem, as a material handling problem? And we've seen that need replicated with other invasive invasive disease and insect threats to our urban forests. So addressing and responding to those kinds of urban forest management needs has been a big driver for utilization. What we've also seen is that demographics have influenced the interest in urban wood utilization. As more of our population, both in the U.S. and other parts of the world, lives in cities, the community conversations around the environments in those cities and the community green infrastructure. And some of those conversations have gained momentum and gained traction within the political power base that we see both in the U.S. and other parts of the world. There also have been times where urban wood utilization has been driven by energy concerns. We've seen that historically with the oil embargo and some of the threats to the oil supply in the 70s, early 80s that pushed some communities to look at biomass energy and utilizing urban wood. And there are still examples of that throughout the country. We're seeing it as people are looking for renewable sources of energy that reduces addresses the waste stream and supports a circular economy. So we're seeing energy concerns again influence conversations around urban wood utilization, and that's closely connected, like I said, to waste management. The last thing I'd say around local needs and drivers is, to date, many of the things around urban wood utilization, many of the conversations and initiatives have focused on the environmental benefits of urban wood utilization and even the economic benefits in terms of the bottom line. But what we do see most recently are really emerging considerations of the social benefits of urban wood utilization. Whether, of course, we look at the quality of life in the urban environment from a well-managed urban forest, but job creation, revitalization, housing, these other types of social and community benefits that are associated with urban wood utilization. And so with the addition of those needs and drivers, I think we're really in an era of talking about urban wood utilization very holistically in terms of sustainability, where there are environmental, economic, and social drivers for these innovations. I think the history of urban wood utilization and urban forestry, some of the milestones to me are just amazing. There's a 100-year history of these activities, but when we look at really scaling things up and creating the capacity to, professionalize and manage and communicate around urban wood utilization, I think some of these milestones are important. The first National Urban Forestry Conference, about 40 years ago, the first national inventory of urban tree residues, kind of the waste stream. We'll talk more about that. But that first inventory was just in the 1990s, which I don't know about you, but feels very recent. But that's probably me aging myself if I say the 90s feel recent. But I do remember the 90s fondly. But in 2003, this is just kind of a shout out to my good friend Sam Sherrill, publishing a book that really tells the story of harvesting urban timber across the U.S. I know Jennifer knows Sam as well, and I do think that his book helped really plant a flag and measure a baseline of where we were in 2003 with the innovation and entrepreneurial businesses around urban timber. But then very recently, in 2014, I think this is such an important milestone that the Forest Products Journal, which is a very important publication when it comes to the innovations and the work and the research around forest products, and in 2014, they did a special section all about urban wood waste. So to me, that's an important milestone in terms of urban wood being recognized within the forest products sector. And then most recently, just last year, the first World Forum on Urban Forests held in Europe with FAO support and participants from around the world. I think that's, again, a milestone that indicates this is a global effort that we're seeing around urban wood. So in terms of the numbers of urban wood, people always want to know how much wood is there. And the good news is we have some information about this. The bad news is, personally, I think we really got to get better on our numbers. We have broad numbers. There's kind of competing different surveys that count some things and don't count other things. So we do have numbers, and those numbers tell us there's a lot of wood. There's at least 4 billion urban trees, 70 billion if you include metropolitan areas, suburban areas, those kinds of things. So a lot of trees, and somewhere on an annual basis, 15 to 38 million tons of wood residue, logs, tops, brushes, stumps, those materials. I mean, it's a very large volume of material that is available. But like I said, there's a lot of wiggle room in those numbers, and we don't have it broken down very well necessarily to regions, states, all kinds of other things that we could tease out of those numbers that would help with urban wood utilization in terms of market development and creating some more opportunities. Because there are opportunities, in my opinion, and we see them. They're already out there and in place in traditional markets. I mean, urban wood can go into any product you can make out of wood. And so we do see traditional sawmills and other types of wood product companies, certainly biomass energy facilities, utilizing urban wood in just their natural forest product mix. I mean, if they're close to an urban area and they can get a consistent supply and everything pencils out, we do see traditional markets utilizing urban wood. We see that especially after disturbance or storm events where there's a volume of material that needs to be moved. We do see traditional forest industry partners respond to those needs and utilize storm debris, much of which is, of course, urban wood. There are also market opportunities around green building in terms of showing preference for locally sourced materials and those kinds of things, the kinds of standards that urban wood can easily meet and deliver on for green building goals. And there are certification programs, whether it's SFI or FSC, PEFC. The third-party certification programs also provide an opportunity for urban wood within their chain of custody as a controlled source of material. To date, None of the programs have certified urban forests, so we don't have that opportunity for urban wood, but urban wood can be recognized as a due diligence, controlled wood, or non-controversial source within the supply chain for certification programs. Last year, Dovetail did extensive investigation of green market opportunities for urban wood, and if you're interested in that, I would encourage you to visit our website and look at that report, and I'd be happy to go into details with anyone who wants to go into that further. There are many constraints. I mean, urban wood has grown rapidly. One of my things I always do is I just kind of play around with Google and put in urban wood in whatever city I can think of, and I'll tell you, 99% of the time, you put in a major U.S. city and the word urban wood, and you will come up with businesses, entrepreneurs, companies, retail outlets, initiatives. I mean, it's well distributed throughout the country, and it's very different. I've been doing that Google exercise, I won't tell you how many years, but that's my measure of growth to some degree, is just kind of seeing what's on the internet. And, you know, a few years ago, I'd say 10 years ago, there were some major hot spots around the country, but today you can find urban wood activities, I'd argue, in every state, every major metropolitan area. So it's widespread, but there are constant concerns about wood quality, wood quantity, the markets, access and the growth of those markets, inventories, what wood's really available from year to year and for planning purposes. Plans within cities of how they're going to handle that material on an ongoing basis, as well as for storm response, and then general community support. We have certainly seen instances around the country where tree removals in parks or street trees can create controversy. Emerald ash borer, Dutch elm, these types of disturbances have led to some pretty large-scale tree removal, and that does create community concern and needs to be addressed. But one thing I would say, looking at this list, many of these constraints are universal to forest products. We hear similar versions of these constraints when we talk about rural forestry. So this is kind of the nature of raw material sourcing or working with wood as a raw material. And at the end of the day, the key theme here is supply, whether it's getting our numbers right, having good relationships with the cities or the other jurisdictions that manage the trees and are responsible for their removal, but stabilizing that supply chain and making sure it's high functioning is really a key consideration for the long-term development of urban wood utilization. And you know, this, I want to transition just slightly, and I don't have too much more I want to cover. Yeah, good. I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for Jennifer's discussion. But I want to highlight this report. A couple years ago, Dovetail did a report where we looked at urban wood reuse and recycling in North America. We looked at the U.S. and Canada. And at the time, we were really just looking at this, and this was just a couple years ago. I mean, I'm aging myself again, too. 2013 seems like yesterday. But anyway, at that time, we were still kind of calling it reuse and recycling. But one of the exciting things to me that's happened is we're starting to talk about wood recycling, you know, wood from deconstruction when houses or buildings, or here in the Midwest, when grain elevators, that's one of our big deconstruction sources of wood. But when these buildings and infrastructure have to be deconstructed, that wood can also be referred to as urban wood. And when we think of urban wood that way, and think of urban wood within reuse and recycling, you know, not just from trees in urban areas, but also from buildings and infrastructure in urban areas, I think that's very exciting. I think it allows urban wood to really kind of complete the picture of wood resources across the landscape, and it creates kind of critical mass for some of the systems that we want to improve and the environmental performance indicators that we want to see impacted by these efforts. So I'm very excited about that. But this report does provide, again, some detailed numbers about available wood within municipal waste streams and some of the different surveys of that. So if you're interested in the numbers and what's available, this would be a good report. So with that, the last thing I'd say is, you know, looking to the future, like I just mentioned, in the recent years as we started to think about deconstruction and wood recycling within that conversation of using urban wood from trees, I just think bringing those two pieces together has created just a critical mass and a very exciting conversation with partners and able to look across systems in a very complete manner that addresses the complexity of our urban built environment. and we continue on this path of, in my opinion, of traditional and urban forestry coming together. I am trained as a forester, worked in forestry more than 20 years, and I just continually see urban forestry and traditional forestry, wrestling with some of the same challenges and also coming to some of the same conclusions about what they need to grow and what issues they really want to tackle. One of the ones I have my eye on recently is the emerging conversation around urban wildlife. And just as we've seen in recent generations, more and more cities have urban foresters and arborists on staff. I fully predict, and you can quote me on this, that over the next generation, we are going to see cities that have, more and more cities that have urban wildlife biologists on staff. I say more and more because I suspect there are some cities I'm not fully aware of that already have this. But within academia and the research community, they're looking at urban wildlife management, and I think we're going to see more and more of that going forward. And to me, that's just another dimension of traditional forestry that is intersecting with urban forestry. So, final thing is I really think urban wood utilization will continue to grow as we continue to get our numbers right. I'm excited about the forest inventory and analysis, the FIA program, doing more work with urban forest inventory, and I look at the waste stream numbers. As we get our numbers really honed in, that will really help cement some of these utilization opportunities. So with that, I would turn it over. I don't know if we want to take any questions at this point, Phil, or let Jennifer share her information as well.